Kelly and see what's on her mind. Kelly, what can we do for you tonight?
Hi. Hey, so just to start off, I am a bisexual atheist.
Okay.
And I'm actually married to a theist. We've been together 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, sorry, I'm a little nervous.
No worries.
The topic of having kids has been recently brought up.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he believes in God, he doesn't go to church. But now that kids are on the table, he wants to start raising them religiously.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure how to tackle that.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting problem to have. And I don't mean to make light of it, but for so long when I myself, was in the church and everything else, the idea of people wanting to raise their kids to be religious without actually actively caring or meaningfully relating to their own religion really baffled me. And it wasn't, honestly, until in the last year or so, getting to know Dr. Ray and reading his work that I started to really understand this idea that religions are basically a virus that is seeking to propagate itself. And one of the ways it really focuses on doing that is through, having more children than the other religions. And, by making sure that everybody maintains the religion that they grew up with. So I definitely see that pressure that you're under and why that's such a tense thing in the home.
Right. And it's a thing where I don't hide my bisexuality. I don't hide being an atheist who's talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
He's never pressured me to read the Bible or go to church. And he really doesn't practice it in any way. So when we started talking about having kids, it really just was confusing to me because it had never been a topic that we'd really discussed, and I really didn't see where it was coming from. It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, a lot of religious thought is sort of linked into like specific, times or periods or times of life. When you have a marriage, you get the wedding with the priest and the vows. And, at the funerals, we're supposed to have like a preacher telling us about the person and where they've gone and such like that. And that's a lot, I can see the parallel there with, and then when you have kids, you bring them up right in the church, even if you've let it slide, that this is the time when you're supposed to bring it back up. And that's sort of dangerous, I guess, because it's always waiting.
Right.
Yeah, there's a reason we associate, quote, family values with this sort of conservative religious viewpoint, because there is a huge emphasis not just on, quote, the family, but on children and on making sure that children are brought up in the church.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of subtle messages that we keep inside of. No, you're good. we keep those in the back of our brains without noticing, and then suddenly when they're prompted, it's like, oh, yes, I have to do the church thing because my child needs to be raised in the church.
It's a dormant virus that kind of kicks in, under certain conditions.
Yeah.
So, Kelly, I know we've kind of I'm sorry.
We keep doing that too.
Yeah, I don't mean to keep doing that. I guess I just meant to say that I know we keep sort of describing the problem that you already know that you have without really getting any closer to helping you answer it. But I guess before we dive in any further, I'd love to just hear from you kind of what this all looks like or what sorts of things you think might work or what you've tried or what you're looking for.
I will say up to this point, he's been very open-minded, especially with our relationship, which I think is one of the reasons why we stayed together this long. 7 years. Wow.
Yeah.
He was very great about when we got married. It was secular. Our vows had nothing to do with religion. It was amazing. And I feel like he did that really for me. And that's why I want to hear him out with this. But at the same time, I'm thinking, wow, like this is such a big deal because this is going to affect my future kids' lives so dramatically to try to indoctrinate them with something I wholeheartedly don't believe in. Mm-hmm. And we've had open discussions, and it's been, like I said, it's been more recent. And his whole thing is he doesn't want them feeling alienated, I guess, from his side of the family because they are so heavily involved. I will say that his dad is a part-time pastor, so that kind of is there in the background. And he does take our niece to church. And I understand that my husband's worried, like, oh, well, my parents will want to take them. Are you going to tell them no? And they can't have that time with his parents. And it scares the shit out of me.
Sure. No, I think that that's only human. And, you know, I would hope that he would be able to acknowledge, I don't want to necessarily use the word hypocrisy, but just sort of the incompatibility of his own actions with his sort of stated beliefs. If he sincerely believes that all humans are inevitably going to go to hell unless they take certain steps by, you know, praising Jesus as Lord and living according to his principles and these different things, then he should be living a life that sounds pretty different than the one you're describing. And so if his...
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, so if his beliefs are incompatible with his actions, then there's laziness somewhere. Whether it's laziness in actually living out what he believes or laziness in actually thinking through and evaluating what he believes. And you would like to think that that's something you could challenge him on and just sort of simply point out that, you know, it's really hard for me to take you seriously that you believe this stuff, that you really, truly, in your heart, know that this is true, know that Jesus is Lord or whatever, however he chooses to frame it. If you really believe that, then why aren't you living that? And I don't know if that kind of confrontation is on the table for you, if that's something that a conversation that you could have where he'd be able to really hear you or what that might look like. But I would like to think in a perfect world that would be the easiest or shortest route. I don't necessarily know, though, Sarah, if that is effective or if there's a gentler compromise or another way about this.
Oh, gosh. Because there's no easy way out of this situation without, like, long discussions. But my thought most immediately is that argument of I want to bring our child up this way because they will fit in better, they will be better in relation with the family, et cetera, is one that has been used throughout long before I was born, to basically excuse all manner of forcing your children to be how you want them to be. You know, and the numerous examples that I can think of for young queer children of various types just stand out immediately. You know, we can't have our child, you know, display, wear that or show that they are like people of the same gender or anything like that, because, you know, what will the other families think, or they'll get made fun of at school, or my parents will never understand, or that sort of thing. And that argument just falls apart because it's not, because it's basically using the well-being of the child from a point of, as an argument against supporting the well-being of the child. And when you look at it closer, the well-being that they're thinking about is generally more tied in with that parent's comfort than the actual child's good health and happiness.
And I feel like as someone who is in the LGBT, community, if I allow my husband to take our child to church or to teach them the Bible, what does that say about me? Does that say like that I don't accept myself, that I don't believe what I'm doing is right? And there's so much hypocrisy to it because my husband is so okay with me being bisexual. He's never told his parents, but he himself is okay with it. He's never questioned it. But then there's so much to that religious side of him that obviously attacks that notion.
Well, and
And
I,
it's just a big bunch of confusion.
yeah, and it certainly is. And, I'm not meaning to be overly harsh to him or to step in as an absolute stranger and describe your marriage or talk about the person that you love so deeply in any kind of intimate way, because I certainly don't know y'all. But I do think that it is worth noting and just sort of validating and acknowledging the fact that while he may accept you as who you are, he's also not being honest and accepting the consequences of the honesty in presenting you to the world that way. And even if he sort of explains it as not wanting to ruffle feathers, not wanting to upset or alienate his family, valuing those relationships, he's still willing to cover up or to hide a piece of your identity in a way that is really concerning to me, to be honest with you. And I think that regardless of how y'all are navigating that as a couple, what your desire is or what you all have come to, I just want to kind of validate to you that this concern you have for your child is probably in large part, or at least in some part, tied to your own experience of being a little bit invisible and having that kind of forced on you, or whether that's something you've chosen yourself, it's still coming from a place of pressure and oppression in a religious culture and society that we're all in. I hope that's not out of turn for me, but I see that as painful.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
It really does.
We want our children to have it better than we do.
Mm-hmm.
Not, force them into the same roles that we're having to play.
Yeah, so that said, there are definitely ways around this and things that some people feel comfortable with. Oftentimes, when one parent insists on involving religion or religious practice into a child's life, another can insist on providing a more balanced viewpoint, whether that's, every other Sunday you go to church with grandpa, and then on the alternating Sundays we go to the Natural Science Museum, or we explore other world religions. We find out a little bit about Buddhism. We find out a little bit about Islam. And then we have sort of an opportunity to compare and understand sort of the complexities of these things, because each of those places, whether you're going to a mosque or a temple or a church, is going to tell you that they have the only truth. And by presenting that message, you give a child at an age-appropriate time an opportunity to recognize, hey, they can't all be right. And that kind of introduces some critical thinking. I don't know that I love that solution, just because it is going to bring a lot of tension, and there's a lot of other factors where you're maybe introducing concepts and complications that aren't necessary. But at the same time, that might be a compromise that you and your husband could come to.
It certainly has, it has stuff in its favor. The power of religion is largely the power of context. If you grow up in this as the context that you're in, you accept it as the background to which everything else goes. And so if you grow up with, partial religious upbringing, and then you have something else to compare it to that's as prominent in your life, then you're not necessarily just going to take it whole cloth. You're going to have a healthy way to look at things and choose for yourself what you believe. Whereas if all you have is the religion, it's a lot harder to break out of that. So yeah, just having that counterexample is a really powerful thing.
Right. I think that idea of bringing a learning opportunity to other religions and other, beliefs may be, like you said, a good compromise. And I believe that may actually be a good solution. So I'm not trying to tell him, well, an absolute no, this will never happen. But it will still give, an opportunity to look at another worldview.
Yeah. And, I don't want to put words in your mouth or express how you feel, but I think it's worth mentioning to him that for you, this is not a intellectual conversation. This is not about the logic of whether or not there is a God, or, the sort of the philosophical inner workings of those complex arguments. All of that is true and all of that's happening, but that there's a very visceral feeling, regarding your identity. And your human rights as part of that identity. And so wanting to make sure that your child avoids that type of oppression is something that he may not be really aware of. And so putting a human face, your human face to it, and just letting him know, my concern is not about alienating family. It's not about, missing out on holidays. It's about like the very human cost of suicide, of self-harm, of all of the other aspects that come from a queer identity in a religious context, which is not even to suggest that your child is gay or anything else, but that's your very real, very human concern.
I also wanted to say, because you said something a moment ago about how, you weren't, I don't remember your phrasing, I'm sorry, but you talked about not saying that, this can't happen to him. And I just wanted to take that aside and say, talking about traditional gender roles for a moment, women are sort of trained by culture to set our desires and our needs sort of aside for other people. It's sort of taught as our role in a lot of ways, and we tend to sort of take that internalize it. And so I just wanted to make sure that when you're having these discussions that you're undoubtedly going to be having a lot of as you continue to discuss having children, that you remember and reinforce, not just internally but externally, that your needs and your desires and your comfort have the same weight and the same importance as your husband's. Mm-hmm. Because it is so easy to fall into, well, I can compromise so that he gets what he wants. And so, if you are willing to bend, it should be in that he is willing to bend also.
Mm-hmm.
Right. No, and I really do need to take that into consideration, because I am just trying to be as confrontational as possible. Mm-hmm. But I do see what you're saying, that I do need to make sure that my wishes in this whole process is met too.
Yes.
Well, especially when we're talking about religion, because whether we believe in your God or not, when you invoke the divine, it makes every other argument seem sort of unimportant. And of course it isn't, because just because your imaginary friend has magical powers doesn't mean anything, since they're imaginary.
Right.
But we do tend to defer to the power of God, even if we don't believe in a God or his power. So there's just sort of a hush that falls on these things that tends to lead atheists to feel like they should acquiesce oftentimes in situations like this. So certainly we're not encouraging you to be pugnacious or to get into fights for no good reason. The peace and the calm of the household is important, but the safety and the well-being of the kids in that household is also incredibly important. So, I hope that this at least just helps give some kind of overall insight into all of us. I know it's really murky waters that you're swimming in.
Right. Well, I appreciate everything. And
oh, okay. Looks like the call got disconnected, but
done.
So we do thank you so much for calling and wish you the best, because that definitely sounds like a tricky situation. I mean, yeah. I'm not a parent myself, but I can only imagine the discomfort of having that kind of conversation with your partner.
Yeah, no doubt.